Welcome to the last day of school. This is our final prep week video, our final AP Live video, and we're so happy that you've joined us. As you can see, we brought some friends today. We thought it'd be a good idea to take advantage of today to pass along some exam tips, some pointers, just a little bit of the collective wisdom of the AP community to help you guys do your best on your upcoming exam. So we're going to just go around the table here and introduce ourselves and give some advice so that you can hear some voices beyond just me and Miss Ray Fields and see what's out there and what everybody has to say. And if it's all right, I'm just going to go ahead and start and then pass the baton and let you hear from some of these other fine folks that are with us today. What I want to share with everyone, anyone watching who's going to take that AP exam in a couple weeks here, my two favorite pieces of advice. One came from a college professor in a buyer behavior class. And it was very simple. He would say all the time, a problem well defined is half solved. And I just thought that was brilliant. And first and foremost, I'll say it's a life lesson. It does apply well beyond the AP macro exam. But specifically for AP macro, make sure you read the question. Make sure you take an extra 5 seconds to process what's being asked of you. And then my second favorite piece of advice, answer the question being asked of you. Because I can't tell you, and I think my friends here will agree, how many times we'll read an answer and it's a beautifully written answer and it's logically consistent, it's accurate, but it doesn't answer the question that was asked, and the child does not get credit for the question, for the response. Define the problem, answer the question that was asked of you, and you're going to do just awesome. And with that, I'm going to close my mouth and I'm going to let my friends talk a little bit here and pass along some of their wisdom. And I'm going to ask my mentor, Miss Patty Brazil, to get us started off here.
Okay, well, hi from upstate New York, in Finger Lakes of New York, where it's snowing on May 8th. My first piece of advice is for you to not to stress over the time. I promise you will have enough time as long as you have practiced this and know what you're doing. The next thing I would suggest to you is that you have in front of you, this is open book, write out all the models that you have learned, write all the formulas that you have learned, know when you use them, and remember that these models that you have learned tell a story. Let the model tell the story and then be sure you can explain it. Practice that. Practice that before. Practice it with your family. They will love for you to explain what an aggregate demand, aggregate supply model is telling us and what it looks like during a recession. I promise, if you are ready that way, you will do well. Congratulations on getting this far. And now I'll pass it back to you.
All right, that's so good. Yeah, talk the talk with your family. Practice it. They'll be so impressed. Next up, I'm going to pass it to Brian Held, my good friend Brian Held. He's way out west, and let's see what he has to say.
Hey, Zoomers, everybody. First off, I just want to say I'm definitely inspired to see all of you, working hard to this AP finish line in the midst of everything. But I'm coming from Los Angeles. I teach at Loyola High School, and here is my AP macro tip. And I think when you're doing a summary study, you want to look at the big picture. And my tip is that you look at the interconnectedness of the various models that we've been doing, and not just each graph or each model in isolation. So here's just a few illustrations of that. First, if you're showing economic growth, you could show that with a rightward shift of the long run aggregate supply curve or the production possibilities curve shifting outward. So that's one way that these models are interconnected. Another way, you're looking at the business cycle and the aggregate demand, aggregate supply curve and the Phillips curves are kind of simultaneously showing that. So one illustration of that is if you have nominal wages changing, or if you have expected prices changing, that's both going to at the same time shift your short run aggregate supply curve and your Phillips curve together. And finally, one other way is with the models that use the interest rates like for example, the money market or the loanable funds market, you want to take the results of those changes on the interest rate and see if you can connect them into like the aggregate demand and aggregate supply and the overall economy. So again, good luck. And also remember, you guys can do it.
Thanks, Brian. It's all about connections, folks. It's all about connections. You got to be able to connect the dots. Okay, next on our list of AP All-Stars here, Miss Holly Jones is going to give you a few words of advice.
Right. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad I have a chance to sit and talk with you and try to give you some advice, I guess, just shy of 2 weeks before you sit for the exam. I teach in Pennington, New Jersey, but right now I come to you from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where it just started raining. So, you know, weather can be a funny thing. I'm actually glad I'm placed in this order where I am, because a lot of what I have to say will dovetail with what you heard from Brian as well as from Matt. And the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about was making sure that when you are writing out your responses, that you have complete logic chains so that we understand what your thinking is and how you arrived at the answer that you did. We certainly want to know what your thinking is. We want to be able to give you full credit and see what it is that you can tell us, but we also want to make sure that you're arriving at the right answer for the correct reasons. So for example, Mr. Held was talking to you about linking markets and real interest rates. He even mentioned something about economic growth rates and so on. So for example, if you're told in a scenario that there's an increase in government spending with no change in taxes, and what will happen to the economic growth rate, and that's the question, and you conclude, well, the economic growth rate will fall, but you don't give us the intermediate links in between that bring us through what Mr. Held talked about. You don't actually talk about the changes to the real interest rate because you didn't mention the loanable funds market, and you don't talk about capital formation changes, then it's going to be really hard for us to assign you some credit. And the second word of advice that I would give you is to make sure that your answers are internally consistent as you write your response. So an example of this would be if the setup for the problem is that the actual rate of unemployment is less than the natural rate of unemployment, and you're asked to identify an open market operation, and you say buy bonds, the money supply will increase, that's great. If, however, on the follow-up question about what happens to the nominal interest rate, you say, well, the nominal interest rates rise, that's not so great. Now you've internally contradicted yourself. And if and the next follow-up question from that is based on the change to nominal interest rate, what happens to aggregate demand? And you say aggregate demand increases, I'm sorry, but you've reversed yourself again. And so you're all tangled up, and we're feeling very sad for you, and we don't want you to be sad by any means. So please, please, please reread your responses, make sure they make sense relative to what we've asked you. Make sure you're linking back to the appropriate spot in the question, and you'll be great. I promise you. Good luck to all of you.
That's so good. Consistency, folks. Consistency. You've got to be consistent throughout, and that is so true. Next up, Mrs. Sally Meek is going to share some of her knowledge. Are you coming from Meekland today?
Yes, I am. My own little fiefdom. Yeah, I heard that you went over Meekland. So now we know where that came from. Yes, well, and actually I'm in Texas, so a little bit different weather, but I'm just excited to be here for this happy hour, this exciting hour. And I have 4 tips for you. The first one is to use the models. The models are your friends. And I know that you're not going to have to draw the models, but you will use them as you answer your questions. For instance, if you have a question that asks you about what's going to happen to real income in the economy when the price of oil goes up, then because you know the axes of the models and you know what all the curves represent, you know that it's your buddy aggregate supply and aggregate demand that you want to bring to this party. So that will help you see that when that short run aggregate supply curve shifts to the left and you go down to the horizontal axis, which represents real GDP and real income, you can see on the model, your buddy, the model has given you the answer to what happened to real income. So know what all the curves represent and know what all the axes represent and sketch those so that you can answer the question that was asked. Focus, okay, tip number 2, focus on the verbs and the questions. And this goes with what Mr. Romano mentioned about answer the question that you were asked. It will help you if you focus on the verbs. If there's something that says explain, that means you have to give the economic rationale, like Ms. Jones talked about, using the linkages that go through. Calculate means give a numerical answer and show your work. Identify, or sometimes it'll say what is or what will. You just need to give the answer, or directional change. Now, one caution about that: budget changes are not up and down answers, and open market operations are not up and down answers. Open market operations are either buy or sell, and budgets either move toward deficit or move toward surplus. So no arrows in that case. Okay, and just as a little aside, this is not a verb, but the difference between short run and long run is significant. Mr. Hell talked about economic growth and showing economic growth. So when something says what's going to happen in the long run, make sure you're giving a long run answer. And in the case of economic growth, it would be you've somewhere in there got to get increase in capital formation. So focus on whether you're asking about short run or long run. Okay, tip number 3, be ready to deal with the unexpected. I know it's always comforting when you look at a question and it looks exactly like what you've seen before, but the intent is to see what you understand. And so the question should look different than what you've seen before. So calm down, take a deep breath, and focus on what you know, because you can handle it. There was a wise man, I think that we all know. He lived in Artland or Rayland, I forget, someplace. And he said, if you have a map, you can get someplace that you've never been before because you know the process and you know how to use the tools. And this is exactly the same thing. So just focus on what you know, apply the processes that you've been practicing all semester, and it's okay if it's unexpected. Also, sometimes there will be additional information in a question that is not necessary to answer the question. So we want to see if you are going to be distracted by that. So sometimes you just want to discard information. Oh, I don't need to know that for this. If I'm trying to calculate the real interest rate and somebody tells me the growth rate of real GDP, I don't need to know that. So I can just mark that out, okay? Tip number 4, answer the questions in the order asked. The questions are written to produce a certain type of logic. And if you will follow the questions in the order asked, you will tend to produce that logic. It will also help you hold things constant. When we're asking you about one variable changing, everything else is being held constant. And sometimes when you go off on tangents, you're not holding everything else constant and you kind of get yourself in trouble. Okay, so those are my 4 tips that all build on or go with what these other folks have said. And best of luck to you guys. You're going to do awesome.
Thank you so much for those. Were fantastic. Those were so good. Students, I hope you're listening. I hope you are writing this stuff down because it's awesome. Next on our list is Miss Melanie Fox. She's going to join us and tell us a little bit about from her perspective what you can be doing here.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Melanie Fox. I'm a collegiate assistant professor and the director of the undergraduate program in economics at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And in addition to all of the great tips that you've heard so far, I wanted to remind everybody to really talk the talk. It's really important to use economics terminology. And that's because there are a lot of terms that people use and just everyday talking, everyday parlance that have a much more nuanced meaning in economics. So a good example of that is, if friends or family are talking about investments, they're probably not talking about a category of GDP. They're talking about something very different. I mean, they're related and interconnected, but when you use the word investment, it means something specific in economics. If you're using the word capital, it means something very specific in economics, or growth. So if you're using words like that, some of those specialized words that we use, make sure you're using the words that you mean to use. You spent a lot of time now learning to speak economies. So make sure you actually speak economies and not revert to just the talk of some everyday Joe. The other thing I wanted to do is really reiterate what Matt and Sally have said so far about answering the question you've been asked. Right? The way I like to think of it is you don't get to write your own question. You gotta answer the question that's been presented to you, no matter how much you know about something else, because that's what we're asking you about. On top of that, I know everybody's worked hard in some fairly unusual circumstances, to say the least. And I know that hard work is going to pay off, not just on the exam, but on all these skills that you are going to bring about learning and being an independent learner when you get to college.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. Man, I'm so glad you brought up investment and capital, because those are just yeah, those are words of trouble sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's a big one. So students, write it down. You know what you mean when you say investment. That's excellent. Next on our list, Miss Stephanie Vanderford is going to share some tips.
Hi, everybody. I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I teach at Providence Day School. Congratulations for sticking with the whole remote learning process through all of these weeks and working really hard to get yourself almost up to the point of the exam. I know you guys can do it. Like Miss Jones said, just a couple more weeks and you guys are going to be great. So a lot of the tips that I was thinking of are very much in line with what others have said. In fact, the very first thing I thought of was answer the question that you're being asked, which I actually had to say to my 8-year-old while we were working on her homework today. So that is a lesson for everybody in life, I think. But the way I sort of refined what I wanted to tell you guys is use the exam as a way to show us what you know. And I think that may be really obvious, but there were a few specific things I thought of as how you can do that. So first, if you get to a part of a question that doesn't sound familiar to you, you don't think you know how to answer, you know it's something you've forgotten, don't let that stress you out. Although the questions do tend to sort of build on each other as you go, that doesn't mean you have to give up on the rest of the question. So don't let yourself stress out. Don't throw in the towel on a question. Keep working your way through, even if you get to something that feels like a stumbling block. So that's the first part of it. The second part sort of is in line with what Ms. Jones said about not having internal inconsistencies. Don't go on and on with an answer for so long that you end up showing us what you don't know instead of what you do know. We want to see what you do know. And if an answer, an explanation sort of rambles on for a long time, then sometimes we end up realizing maybe the student doesn't actually know that. So shorter, more concise answers tend to be better that way for you actually just showing us what you know. And then the last one, and again, this is sort of getting at the answer the question being asked, but do so completely, follow the directions. If the directions say to explain, make sure you've explained. And explaining typically involves more than just reiterating what was already in the question. You've got to link what was in the question to the answer you're giving. There needs to be something in between those two things as an explanation. And then if it's a calculation and you're asked to show your work, make sure you are indeed showing your work. We don't like it when we feel like we're looking at a paper where we think the student probably knows what they're doing, but they haven't followed the directions, and therefore we can't give them credit. And we want to be able to give you credit whenever we can. So congratulations, keep working hard for, not quite 2 more weeks. We know you guys can do it, and good luck.
Great, thank you so much. Miss Teresa Fisher has joined us. We would love to hear a few sage words of advice from Miss Fisher.
Hi, I'm Teresa Fisher, and I'm from Pound Ridge, New York. And I've been sitting here for the last few minutes listening to what people have said, and they basically have said it all. All right. But I think what's important is that you have to remember that you studied hard from the beginning of this year, and that you are now going to show people, the graders, all the hard work and dedication to learning that you have put in. And not to be afraid of this, but to show them, I've got this exam. I know this material. One of the good ways, and I'm sitting with a clock behind me, thinking about how I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks, might be something you may be thinking about. How am I going to review? Well, one of the ways is to review all your graphs and to understand all the parts of those graphs. Like a story, you know, they say that a picture is 1,000 words. Well, in economics, it's probably more than 1,000 words, all right? And for you to be able to explain that graph, all the parts of that graph, making sure that you understand the labels around all the parts of that graph, to be able to explain it if, I don't know, oil prices go up, what will happen to this graph? If in micro, if the per unit cost goes up, what's going to happen to quantity and price? And be able to explain it concisely. If you start to ramble on and on, the fear is that you will start to change your mind in the midst of it. So always go with your gut answer. The first answer is always the best answer. And you answer it in the order in which that is given. You're going to be doing this online. So maybe you could take notes on the side and to be able to answer the questions online. So I know in my heart of heart that you are all going to do very well. And I commend you for all the hard work and dedication to learning, because this is going to take you very far into the future. So good luck to all of you.
Okay, now I'm inspired. I want to go take this exam. I'm ready. I'm ready to go. That was so good. Ms. Ray Fields, what would you like to add?
It's been so exciting to me to listen to all these amazing experts talk about what it is they hope for you when you sit down to take this exam, that it's an opportunity for you to showcase everything that you've learned about economics, which we all feel so passionately about, and think it's so important that this is, you know, what Dr. Fox talked about, the language, right? Economy it's a really powerful language to speak. It allows you to understand the world around you in ways that people who don't speak it don't understand. And so focusing on those words and understanding those terms and definitions, right? Nobody, did you hear in all of this expert opinion about how to be prepared for the AP Macroeconomics exam, not once did you hear the word memorize, right? All of the educators who are on this call right now really care about your learning and your opportunity to demonstrate what you've learned. And so think about, fortunately, the econ exams come sort of at the end of the exam time period. You know, for some of you, your brains are going to be really tired. You've worked really hard and you've taken other exams. But for others of you, it means you've still got 2 more weeks. So that language is a really important language to speak. And I think one of the things that freaks kids out the most is coming across a term that they may not have seen before or feels unfamiliar in a context to them. It's a term that you can reason through your understanding of, right? So if you're used to seeing aggregate spending, and it says aggregate expenditure, don't panic. Don't panic. Think about the context of the question. They are asking you about something that you know, right? But the more economies you speak, the more confident and comfortable you are with that language, and the more facile you'll be when you're responding to those types of questions. You know, I think that one of the things that was difficult for a lot of us in preparing for tonight was not stepping on one another's toes and wanting to have unique, original tips for you. But I think what we heard is that a lot of us who've attended the reading have seen the same mistakes again and again and again and again. And that breaks our hearts for students especially when we hear kids or see kids talking and they know what they're talking about. They've just made an error that nullifies in some way, you know, our ability to award the point. So don't talk yourself out of an answer. You will have time. Yes, we are told to expect that these exams will feel a little bit more time sensitive than they have in the past because of the online format, the 45 minutes. Take your time with the things where you're confident about. But you should have time to think about what you're doing before you start typing. Read the question, read the whole question through, plot out your answer. You're encouraged to have scrap paper so you can draw graphs to have them as tools because they tell the story. And I think that those are the things that I will be telling my students. Think about what you've learned. Take the time to demonstrate what you've learned. And the readers really want to award those points to you if you can do that.
A lot of good advice here today, students. I certainly hope you're listening because this was good stuff. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I really do. I really appreciate the collective wisdom that we have gathered here. I do think it's going to be digested by the students out there, and it's going to be applied in a couple weeks here.